When Terrell said that he felt empty, I knew that it was important for me to help him get beneath that feeling, because it's often the case with young males and males in general that they have a more challenging time, if you will, accessing, locating, and naming those emotions. And it was important for me to help Terrell in the moment see a little bit more of the connection between what he was describing intellectually and what he was feeling emotionally, and bridging that disconnect. I did know, though, that to get there, I couldn't just push Terrell to that awakening, right? Or to that moment of awareness or clarified awareness, that it had to be done slowly. And I could only do it in this fourth session with him because we had built up a fair amount of rapport and albeit trust. And those are also essential elements to helping clients dig beneath those more difficult locations and excavate really the feeling or the wound that lies beneath. I was able to stay calm while Terrell was talking about his frustration and airing it, if you will, because I thought it was important as a therapist in this moment, working with a young Black male, to help him see that his anger and frustration was valid, right? And that in expressing that he wasn't going to push back me or other people in his life, because people who love and honor you hold space for the myriad range of emotions that show up. So I was trying to demonstrate, to mirror, and to model for Terrell that his emotional awareness, the range of emotional expression, is welcomed here. And by doing that, I think also helps him to see, own, validate, acknowledge those emotions in his everyday life, and to integrate them more into the way that he shows up in the world. So I think there are a lot of really critical things that will be very helpful to Terrell in therapy, and that will ultimately help him reconstitute the family relationships that he so desperately longs for. And I think the first thing that's going to be really important is to help him deal with that sense of deep, abiding guilt and shame, and to release himself from the grips of that enormous blame, which is disproportionate really with what he's responsible for. I think most people as observing this therapy interaction can see that, but Terrell needs to see it and needs to rid himself of the weight of that blame, shame, and guilt. And then to get to a place in this therapy and in his life where he actually owns the complex emotions that show up, but also where he makes room for and space for self-love and a sense of worthiness, or that sense of enoughness, right, that we often struggle with. I think those are critical to even getting to the point where we can talk about the real poignant grief and loss that he experiences, which is the third, I think, pillar of his therapy. And I think by working through it in those phases, from the inside out, I think we will get to a better, a more productive, I think, therapeutic outcome for him. There were so many turning points in this session that I, as a therapist, felt were really important. I think the first was when Terrell was able to articulate that he felt responsible for the deaths of his foster father and his siblings. And that a part of him really, although knows cognitively and intellectually that it's not his fault, but at a spirit and emotional level still had difficulty sort of naming that. So that moment in the therapy was really important. And I also think that the other turning point was in that moment where Terrell expressed frustration and he got fairly animated. To have an adult in the room with him not react to that in ways that actually, signaled a pushing back or shrinking back from the relationship, but rather leaning in with wonder and curiosity. I think that kind of a response in the therapy was really a significant significant turning point. And lastly, I think having an opportunity in the therapy to really talk about what he needed to hear from other adults at that time in his life when he felt particularly vulnerable to this loss, this enormous grief and loss, was also a turning point. That he could actually step outside of himself for a moment, if you will, and imagine what he would have needed to hear, what would have been helpful for him to have others say to him. And I think holding space for that in the therapy was a critical turning point that I think when exercised outside could bring tremendous emotional relief for him.
At the very beginning of the session, I definitely wanted to avoid the topic of my stepdad and the relationship that has to my father. That's definitely really touchy for me, and I wanted to stay away from that as much as I could, definitely with Dr. Powell. I think through all the time that I've been dealing with the loss, I don't think I've ever really tried to admit to myself that it was difficult for him, that I missed him, that was a very, very real part of it, the missing of him. I feel like I spent so much time focusing on the losing of him that I didn't get the chance to miss him. When we started talking about me missing my dad, it definitely, the most critical moment I think that rehashes for me is the actual moment of like the accident itself. Talking about it all, I think it's a moment I relive every day of my life, but especially when we talk about it in therapy, I think that's when it comes to life the most for me. It's that moment. When Dr. Powell prompted me to, start thinking about myself as like the 7-year-old child, I think it was really, really helpful. Regarding that incident, I don't think I ever gave myself the opportunity to think of myself as a child. I think that moment jaded me and forced me to grow up really, really fast within myself. And giving myself, help her giving me the freedom of thinking of myself as the child that I was at that time really gave me the opportunity to think about the events as they kind of were, as the 7-year-old boy, and not holding myself to the standards that I do now. The most important moment was definitely the self-forgiveness and touching upon my own feelings regarding that and the way I've gone about viewing that situation and treating myself. And I think the most important moment today in this session was me forgiving myself for it. I feel like Dr. Wizdom, there is and I don't really know why it feels this way, but there is a sense of familiarity there that I can't quite put my finger on. But as reluctant as I was to the initial thought of therapy, I don't know. You sit there and I talk to her, and I just felt like I was talking to somebody that knew me or knew more about my situation than I knew. And I don't know. I guess there's a part of me that really just wanted guidance and wanted to find the key and figure out how I can move to a better place for myself and my family.